Ongi etorri Gutun Zuria Bilbao, Azkuna Zentroko letren nazioarteko jaialdira. Jarraian, letren etorkizuna eta egoera, Gutun Zuria Bilbao, izeneko solasaldia izango da 4 ahotsetan. Iván de la Nuez, María Mur, Iñaki Esteban eta Beñat Sarasolarekin. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a Gutun Zuria Bilbao, Festival Internacional de las Letras de Azkuna
Welcome to Gutun Zuria Bilbao. We're now going to have the conversation entitled Horizon and Outlook for Literature with Iván de la Nuez, María Mur, Beñat Sarasola and Iñaki Esteban. Good afternoon, everybody. The majority of you already probably know this, but we've got Iván, Iñaki, Maria. All 4 of us are advisors to Gutun Zuria and have been for the last 4 years, and that's going to be our approach. We're going to link what we have to say up to the theme of this year, which is the future and organization of this festival. We're going to be speaking both in Basque and in Spanish. And you do know that if we speak in Basque, you have the possibility of following us in Spanish, thanks to the interpretation service. Just to introduce you to a little bit about us, where we all come from, how we approach literature, then we'll talk about things that are related to festivals. So, shall I start? I'm a writer. That's how I've got to where I am. But for me, writing and reading, because of course initially I'm a reader, I've always been a massive reader, and actually even today I read a lot more than I write. So I approach the world of literature as a reader and as a writer. And occasionally I see things from a romantic perspective, especially when I write, because I feel that when I string words together, then these magic moments are created. At least that's the way I feel things. A couple of years ago, Jon Gereniaga visited us, and that was what he said. He said poetic words are very strong. When a word has this creative strength, then you can create something really special. So that's a little bit about me. I broach different subjects in this festival from this perspective. How about you? You said that before being a writer, you're actually a reader. The same happened to me, both in the field of literature and in other fields as well. Because at the end of the day, if you're working in the literature field, it's because previously you were a reader. In my case, I studied sociology and political science. And I've been a consummate reader right from the word go. But actually there came a time when I was really clear on the idea that I would work in the field of politics or communication and politics. That was something I always found interesting. But then I realized that I had the possibility of working in the world of politics, but from a cultural viewpoint, from the viewpoint of contemporary art. And if I'm honest with you, when I was very, very young, I went on a practical placement, and there were 2 options at the practical placement. I could either go to Norway on an Erasmus program, or I could go with Sony, the company Sony, to a strange place where I could go on a practical placement. And I said, okay. My mum said to me, how are you gonna not go abroad with the Erasmus grant? How can you're just missing something. How come you're going to somewhere so small? Why are you going to go for a practical placement there? And then I thought, well, maybe my mum was right. And so I ended up in Consoni. And I've been there for 30 years in this tiny place, Consoni. It's a publishing house which has changed with me. And at that time, we worked with political projects, but from an artistic viewpoint, and we analyzed the current society via contemporary art projects. And that's how we started to publish catalogues on these different projects. Then we moved on and started translating some books, some authors, and collections as well. So Consoni became a publishing house. So Consoni has always been closely tied to the world of literature. And we always have been closely related to Azcuna because we've been artists in residence here. Well, maybe not artists, but we've been like the resident structure here at the Azcuna Centro. We started working here with the radio, then with Gutun Suria. Consoni was in charge a little bit more with seminars and events for independent publishers that we organize, and we carry on. And Consoni still takes a feminist approach in its publishing of books and in its idea of making different voices known. That's how I came to the world of books and Gutun Suria. Iván. My situation is a little bit different. Because of my age and because I'm from Cuba, I've done everything within my possibility. I started out studying history and I wanted to be a historian. I was fascinated by history. But actually I couldn't. I unfortunately ever work in the world of history. And in the 1980s in Havana, there was an interesting artistic movement that accepted me. So I started to talk about them, write about them, together with these artists. And then I eventually came here. I started off as an essayist, and then I became an exile, a Cuban outside of my country. I went first to Mexico, and I wrote essays from a non-academic viewpoint. And I started on exhibitions as well, at a time when my generation, and we're the people that were born in the 1960s, we didn't have curatorial studies. We were self-taught. And we projected our essays, our ideas on collective work, the collective work that you see in exhibition. So I reached the world of art. My first book is called La Balsa Perpetua, because I sort of I went from one place to another. I'm talking about 1998, almost 30 years ago. And somebody came to me and said, when are you going to write a novel? Because there were chapters in my books some were called coasts, and others which were bridges between the different chapters called coasts. And they were always in italics. So she detected that what I should write was the fragile, shady part, and that should bring fiction and fictional novels rather than staying in essays. I haven't been very successful, and I'm still faithful to essays. Consoni has published some of my work. They know how I work. And I've carried on working in the world of art as well. And that's how I've reached here. I've headed up institutions in Barcelona. I know what it's like to program. I know what it's like to live out in the cold as an essayist without an academic background. And I know how to convert this idea that Valerie Mars mentioned so much yesterday, that writing at the end of the day comes initially from reading, because we've all been children, and children aren't normally writers. They've always been readers before. Not only does it come from reading, but this idea of collectiveness, not the primitive communistic idea of collectiveness, or community, but books are sort of like rafts that need more than just an individual. Anyway, that's my past. I'm in a diaspora, but I'm not only it's not a physically in a diaspora, but I write in a diaspora, because the way I write isn't something you can slot into a specific genre. It's a kind of a hybrid way of writing, and that reflects the person I am. My story is pretty normal, really. Yeah, normal. I started reading like mad at 14 because a very young teacher came to my age group. He was very well known, and he was this teacher who, during literature classes, used to read Borja, Borges, Cortázar, Nietzsche, and crime books. So he could spend the whole class just reading books. He was very progressive as a teacher. And he had very, very close ties with his students, at least with some of them. So the 3 years that I had him as my teacher, and he was also very active in literary circles in Bilbao, I met other people. And I'm still friends with many of those people. And that's how I started a sort of a community. Well, it's not a community, it's kind of just a group, a little group of a bunch of friends, shall we say. And that maintained my literary curiosity, and something that you did in the 1780s. You just read. It was obsessive academically. As a result of the 3 years with that teacher, I then went on to study philosophy at a time when philosophy and literature were very closely related, shall we say, because it was very influenced by German philosophy. But it wasn't German philosophy at that time, it was the French philosophy. There was a lot in the 20th century of philosophers who were philosophers, writers, poets on occasions, also playwrights on occasions, and even on occasions, film directors. It was a bit of a mix. But there was this call to be creative. I carried on studying philosophy abroad, but literature was always in the background somewhere. And when I returned here, I worked at El Correo, a newspaper. This was in the 1990s. And for me, these years were very fruitful. At least I thought they were very fruitful for me in Spanish literature, in Spanish. And it was a time when publishing houses were very, very active. You've got people like Javier Marias Muñoz Molina. They would come here. They would come to present their work. You could approach them. And then, of course, Bernardo Achaga, you could follow him right from his first book. his first book wasn't presented here, but his second one was at the top floor of the Concordia Cafe, La Granja Cafe. So that's really what things were like. I remember I interviewed Carlos Fuentes in the Iruña, Carmen Martín Gaite as well. Everybody was easily accessible. I spent 2 years at the newspaper coordinating the cultural supplement, and this also gave me a certain amount of connection with publishing houses. I had some connection with publishers in the first, but they became closer. I had to read new books, and I found out about prizes, literary awards. This is all very interesting, this world. Whatever your opinion may be of the books, it's always a very interesting world to be in. And I started to move away from this world because publishers started to bring writers to Bilbao that weren't the ones that we used to have. Because these writers started to earn a lot of money, or relatively a lot of money, they would give interviews in Barcelona and Madrid, but they wouldn't come to Bilbao, they wouldn't come to Santiago. So publishers tried to attract second or third level writers, so just to promote their books, so you could get an interview with writers who had written books that were well written or badly written, and a lot of the time they were badly written. They weren't great books, and so I sort of distanced myself from that. So and the Guggenheim was built, and it was far more interesting to be in the world of the Guggenheim than the world of literature. But I never lost sight of literature, because at the end, you're a reader. But anyway, I was called at that time from what was called the Alhóndiga then, now the Azkuna Centra, to see what we could organize. And that's when the Gutun Suria Festival started. And once again, that was a way of reinventing myself within the world of literature, and listening to people and what I consider good literature and what others do as well. So that was my return, shall we say, to literature. That's basically my past. Iñaki, I want to just make use of this moment to say the following. When I came here for the first time as a writer, it was to a poetry recital. That was 11 years ago, 2015, and I took part in a section. There were many, many people that were well known here, and I remember that somebody in the audience, with the best of intentions, said to me, well, how I felt when I wrote poetry in Basque. And the person that asked me the question was a Basque speaker. And he said to me, how do you feel when you write in such a special ancient language? And I said, well, I responded, it's difficult to write poetry in Basque, but it's equally difficult to write poetry in Spanish or English. It's the writing that's difficult. The only thing that you have to do to be able to write poetry is have complete command over the language that you're writing. And then I remember another Spanish poet who was in the audience, Antonio González, said to me, very, very, very friendly, he said, Jesus, it's incredible that you have to explain that in Bilbao. And I say that because the very next year I was called to take part in the Basque language side of this festival and to give some ideas. In last few years I've been thinking about that. How can we broach different subjects in this festival from Basque, not just with Basque? It's not just a matter of translation, but an approach, because that can position us in a place, in a geographical place. And as a result of that question that I was asked, I've actually started thinking about this issue. And I thought, have I got the zoo syndrome? Do I feel like I'm in some kind of a museum because I speak Basque? It seems that speaking or writing Basque is exceptional, but actually I think it's completely opposite. Cultural creation in Basque is created in the same way that it's created in other languages around the world. And I think that's the challenge, to think from Basque, try to strike a balance, because then you've got the language issue, how to try to get different authors to come together with different language. But a Basque-speaking author writes in the present, in the same world, and we should all think about that. This is something we've broached in recent years, but it was an idea that was in my head when I started. As for the festival, I've always tried to take that tack. That's always been my outlook. And it all comes from that question that I was asked, that I mentioned earlier. And in the case of Basque, it's not that there's 2 or 3 talks in Basque all of a sudden. No, we always try to make sure as much as possible. For example, the other day I was told that in this year's festival, 57% of the talks would be in Basque. That's what I've been told. I don't know if that's true or not. But the idea is to make that effort so that everything is done either in the auditorium or in Bastille, something that we have to do together, and that happens naturally, because if we don't do things naturally, it means that we're programming things badly. I think we've managed to achieve those figures this year, and we've also managed to make these connections. We see writers from that speak different languages connecting with Basque-speaking writers. So it's important that there be this presence of the Basque language, and it be guaranteed. I've been the most recent addition to this group. I've been very well received, with a great deal of joy, I'd say. That's how I've experienced things as well. And they already worked as advisors to the festival. But then I'm the last person to join this group. You'd been together for a while when I joined. The way I see is that we should approach things, not just in Gutun Surya, but in other festivals as well, but the way we take things in Consoni, the feminist approach, the trans-feminist approach, the way we approach the cultural world using a cross-cutting gaze, an intersectional gaze, so that we're thinking, always saying that not all the invitations that we're going to make should be white people. We need to have different generations. All of this intersectionality, which I'm interested in cultural practice in general, as well as in this event, because at the end of the day, we've all adopt different roles. We have different roles. We are advisors, but as well as advisors, we're many other things. We're mothers, daughters, somebody's couple, many, many things, which are equally as important. And it's important that they be represented and that this be debated, because literature is a way of being in the world. As Montserrat Roch said, she felt that the way to transform the world is to write about it. And I think this is one of the roles of literature. This morning, Valerie Miles spoke about resistance. this word that she used in the first panel session this morning has actually been repeated time and time in other professional moments. Resistance. Yes, it is important to resist in this strange world where we live. And Iván and myself, on occasions, say how important it is to bury this supposedly cultural battle between different class struggles and diversity. That's simply not true. And I think this is something that's very, very represented in this festival. And I think the four of us believe that. I came here because out of art. We were preparing an exhibition. And it's something that is valid for literature and culture. And it was called Never Real, Always Truthful. That for me is the whole point of my life. This was an exhibition here, and it was decided that maybe it would be interesting. By the way, that was at the beginning of 2019. And Fernando Besca said maybe it'd be interesting to spend the Gutun Suria festival talking about literature in art. And the festival was called Without This Museum, What Would Happen? What would happen? And we realized that if all museums were burnt, there would still be texts. There would still be written texts about art, and the fictions of art. Anybody can write a great biography or good catalogue. But what is interesting is a person's biography, not what's in a person's curriculum there, the mistakes they made, the hatreds that they have. And that's how I came to this festival. I was very struck by the fact that it's not entitled a literature festival. It's called a festival of words. That's really interesting because words are more than just literature. It may be posters, conceptual art is full of words and letters. And this motto, Gutun Suria, carte blanche. And I remember, by the way, when I was living in Cuba, my dad said, actually, if you ask for a carte blanche, what you're actually asking for is a glass of rum. So for me, carte blanche means freedom and a glug of rum. Shall I talk about the beginnings of Gutun Suria? We started to talk about Gutun Suria in 2006, that's 20 years ago now. And the Alhóndiga didn't exist at the time, but the Alhóndiga offices existed. And opposite was, and actually heading it up was Maria Gania, who was the first director of the Alhóndiga, which then became the Azkuna Centroa. In addition to the building of this beautiful cultural centre, there was what to fill it with. That was when I was called. And she was the person responsible for setting up the University of the Basque Country's library and also saved from the floods the Bidebarrieta library and many other things we had in common. So it was cool. She called to me and said, what can we do? And I proposed, well, this is a good idea. Why? For two reasons. Mainly because just out of serendipity, I'd read something about the Hay Festival in Cartagena de Indias. and also because you analyze what's missing in Bilbao. You don't want to repeat anything that's already been done, so you don't want to do the same as they do in the Sala Recalde. We wanted something new here, and it's true that literature festivals were really, really important at that time. The Hay Festival in Segovia, and also abroad, one in London, there's one in Berlin, some of which I attended. And it was an event that was also really, really interesting because you had 5 or 6 days where, writers were there, we were talking about literature, there'd be participants, workshops. It was a very, very intense 6 days.
So it was great. So we worked with this idea in mind, and there was the Guggenheim. So they also held a literature festival. Why do we call it international? Because at that time in Bilbao, apart from the fact that it was wanted to be an international city, at that time I was in the city council, so there was this fever of international. There was BBK Live. There was so. Our objective was to build a certain number of bridges with all those events, so link them together. BBK Live then is not the same as the one we have today. So it was in a way to round up what the city was at the time. We were all very thrilled about these kind of events. And so this is a part of the past, and the first editions, but we can talk maybe later on about that, what we love the most. But we wanted to invite all the ones we loved greatly. The first edition was an experimentation, and we had David Hoffman, the historian, the English historian. We also have Jorge Sembrún, and I've always loved Jorge Sembrún. So we also have he's like a kind of a rebel, but he was a huge seducer. And so it was kind of this Juan Goytisolo was for me a myth, and I respected him as a linguist and philosopher, and also as essayist when he taught in Canada. And one of my textbook was of Todorov. So the fact of having him here in Bilbao and taking him around the city of Hanif Purif, that is also, I'm a great admirer of him because of rock mostly, and the fact of having him going around the old part of the city, it was great. Well, I think I will cut this story short, otherwise, well, would you say about that? I'm a mythoman, and I would say, above all, that the festival is a distortion of literature in a positive way. We have the idea of literature as something that is closed and something that is for a certain number of individuals, but I think it is a festival within the fact of having a certain number of events that have to be respected. But this would be another story, I guess. But there is an important aspect, I guess, that is the fact that the festival leads you to a certain number of debates, There is currently a debate that we have to separate the author of the work. And we have also to make a certain number of distinctions. You read the book, you have to look at the publishing house, the distribution, who is going to read that book, who is going to write the resume. All that is creating what is a festival. But also, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that this festival is different. It is easy to organize a festival. You go and you ask to the AI, how can we organize a festival for the year 2027 for the Gutun Suria? It is 20 years old, so it is an anniversary. It's going to be a retrospective based on the past, but also they might talk about the future. So we are ahead this year because we are talking about the future in a way, but if you search in Google and you ask the AI if you want to have a cultural festival, there are many, but I guess it is worth to take a risk. There is the Basque festival. Within this festival, half of the authors and writers are not mainstream authors or writers. They are writers and artists that multitask, not because we think they're hipsters or because there are two generations that can carry on without being multitasking or doing. So this festival could be quite resembling to this time and to this era. It is a bit with the publishing houses, the great publishing houses, but what is the impact of that on the author? Because a great majority has an impact on the marketing, on the protocols, and also on the meals. But it is not going to have an impact on the author. It is not going to have an impact on what the author gets and earns. The difference between a big group or a small group, it's a financial impact. It's not very much a difference unless it is a bestseller. And I think it is something we have to underline. And I think it is important to have a festival looking at this proportion. What is happening with those who are building literature, writing, and with the others, the ones who are organizing the festivals, or those who are working with, and I think we cannot live out of it. So we have to vindicate that. We are maybe able to modulate this proportion. It is to know what is literature. So there is a micro festival in Basque. There are small festivals within the big festival. There's a micro festival. It is one of the professionals' conferences from Gutun Zuria and from the Alhóndiga. And we have mentioned that there has been a particular perspective, or we have to talk about industry, markets, and we have to talk about the smallest and the biggest. But also, we have to be aware of the fact there should be big names that could be linked to big publishing houses, but also there can be authors from an independent publishing houses. I think we have to be aware of that. And it is important. Sometimes we do not do that because on Monday I was in Barcelona presenting a book, and there was a lady that was relative of the author, and she wasn't really, she didn't attended this kind of events, but now she just went home and looked at the publishing houses. It is something that is not so common in the festival. That's why these professionals gathering in the morning that we hold in the mornings, we can see different profiles that are not so common. So there are many roles that mingle together, and this festival at the end of the day is going to gather all these perspectives. And there is another element about the intersectionality. When Sara Torres, Muñer, Hatemi, and Paul were talking about coming to Bilbao. So in an innocent way, there are two people talking, but they come from very different places, one writing in Basque language, another one in different languages, in Arabic, but also in Spanish. And they are, we also have queer identities, migrants. So there was a series of identities, roles, hybridation that were sitting around that table, and this was there. It is important. So these small nuances, and to be aware of these decisions, I think it is something essential, because what stays is the narrative, and in these times we live, it is important to think about the narrative and the story, because fascists are going to not going to care about the narrative. So I think these decisions are relevant. And this morning we talked about the good books, and Iñaki talked about the bad books, and the independent publishing houses. Can we really think about publishing bad books? We have to publish good books, because we have no other option. They are, when we see the opinion polls, and we see, well, there are books that have been selling with 0 books, or less than 100 books. What are the publishing houses? What are the ones in this case? So we think that in these festivals we are not caring about these differences, and I think it is very important. It is not easy, and I am really grateful. So looking at the latest editions, I am not sure about what are the key elements, but it comes to my mind 3 events, or 3 elements. When we had Lord de Moura, and they talked about poetry, and I think that this conversation was really relevant, because it was another way of addressing poetry in highly poetic way. Choming Badiola and came here as well, and they talked about the writing process, and there's 2 writers that come from the art world. And also I have to mention a third moment when Ahmet Arfayus was also in the main room, in the auditorium, and it was the same day that we published it, and this edition was very interesting, because as a festival it was a huge challenge to see how that writer who is not used to this context. It was a very special edition and a very special conversation, and was the first time for them. And I was a bit anxious about that, but it was really great. And I remember these 3 moments. It was really great when Mayalen Lujambio inaugurated the festival. And it was great. It was really moving. Cristina Rivera Garzos also. So we have only 5 minutes to talk about the future. So what about the future? What is the future of the festival? The future does not exist as a definition. But when, if you ask me about the festival or what we are going to, who is going to come, but the interview format, or there are many people that have. They haven't followed these formats quite. Brought the interview written, and even the answers were written on paper. I guess you remember these. The questions were posed by the editor, and she was Argentinian. It was like a creation. It was a text. It was a creation. Very near the theater, or so there was the Argentinian was posing the questions, and he looked at the text and he read the text, underestimating orality and language, and he read the answer, and the interpreters were really happy because everything was written down. Well, yes, they had the text. Yeah, I remember. So how? Well, the interview is going to become a genre. And I remember another book of Highway Way. It was a book of interviews. Interviews for him was a part and parcel of his work, a part of his work, of his art. And this is quite amazing. It's not, it's not someone that is going to be there and talk about the future. It's something different. So, and last but not least, Fernando Raval, that was sticking to his style. The interview was done by Ramón Barea, so he was just there doing a performance, and so Ramón Barea asked him a question. He just got up from his chair, just moving around on the scene, on the stage, but I'm not saying that the interview format is outdated, but maybe it's going to change. We change it when we, for example, decide not to having a moderator. Sometimes it's not really nice to have someone there, but sometimes the fact of having a moderator is going to be interesting. It's not a conversation, it's something else. When talking about the future, I'm going to take a phrase of William Gibson. The future is here. Another phrase from Cuba is no one knows what is the past. So after this sentence, I think we can see a lot about the future, but now I think we have to give the floor to the audience. And so if there are questions, what is the future for a festival. The festivals are quite new. If no one takes the floor, if I may, I would like to add something. As we have previously mentioned, when talking about the future, I see one of the major challenges we have ahead. It would be the concentration of the publishing houses, of the publishers. And what is going to be the consequence of that from another perspective than writing in the Basque language? I see that the situation of these publishers is they are different. There's a wide range, but this gives us a greater freedom. It is not the case in other publishing houses. In Euskera, in the Basque language, we have freedom to write what we really want. But nevertheless, I see that the trend in literature and culture, the major trend is to address literature from the point of view of business. But I'm not quite sure about the. I'm not sure that it's going to be long-lasting, because publishing houses are facing greater challenges to keep up with the sales, because they are selling less books. But what we sometimes think that what we have is never-ending, but I'm not sure about the fact that it's going to be there forever. We are not really sure about what awaits us. As Maria has said, in the Spanish literature, there are publishing houses that are independent, but without these small publishing houses, what would be our situation as an author? What impact has this on your writing? Maybe we will have to take into account the business aspect, or are we going to write exactly the same thing, all of us? Well, I hope that this is going to continue, because in the Basque writing, among the Basque writers, there is a certain degree of complicity. That is to be at the forefront in the Spanish, among the Spanish authors, is very difficult. Not long ago, they invited me to a conference that was entitled "Being in the Forest," or in the I don't know, in the jungle, not a fierce jungle, but the future of literature. We're having in mind the regulation of the fixed price, or it is the books are very expensive, but maybe very soon we will be able to have these regulations to be able to care about all of the small libraries or bookstores. That, for example, there's a bookstore that has a closed. Onza has just closed his door. So these bookstores are being closed, and also publishing houses are vanishing. It is a pity to see all that, because we have what we have is Amazon. The medium publishing houses are are becoming the new Anagrama, the new Planeta, and Amazon is a lifestyle. It's so in front of this lifestyle, my wish for the future is that Planeta disappears. That is something I wish. I wanted to break in small, tiny bits, and then we could have those small, tiny bits, and we will go back to this, in a way, to this community mentioned by Iván, that the word, he used the word community, the reading community, all these small publishing houses that we can see in the Basque language, because we can be in Bogota, in Buenos Aires, and all these small writers are there. But also we have those huge groups, these that are invading all this literally. They are the publishing houses, the bookstores, but also the media. So to have these regulations of the fixed price, I think it is important to protect this biodiversity, and not only only one and only story. The bookstores are the ones who have their words to say. So, but the Caja Quinta was another bookstore that had to pay more to a higher rent, and they had to close. It is not because they do not have readers or they do not sell, it's because of the investment funds, and the housing problem is also having an impact on the publishing houses. It is something that is having a major impact on all of those who are here in the room. And going back to what Iván mentioned, there are two huge literary books and literary groups, and the problem of the bookstore is not the housing problem, I guess. It depends on the label, but Tusquets, for example, is its major objective is not losing money, and that's what is important for Tusquets. So what Iván has mentioned, we are facing those huge groups, just like JP Morgan, or those banks that want to earn thousands of millions. And the worst thing about all that is that these authors, we think they are big authors and that are really happy to write, they do not earn any money. We can talk about the stars of literature if they are outstanding and famous, but we mustn't forget the fact that those people are living in huge penthouses, and they are the authors are not living in such a luxury. That's what we see. 1% are living in this. There are three important and relevant authors, and the rest are not in that group. And this morning, Valérie Miles, when talking about the publishing houses, the independent publishing house has not. If you have to sell, you have to change profession, and you have to close the independent publishing house, despite the fact that books and all the books of the publishing houses are good because there is no other way around. They have no other alternative in that way. I think we've got 1 minute left. If there is another question,
I heard somebody say that 6% of writers in Spain are able to live out of what they publish, and fixed prices have to stay because the publishers is strictly European, except for one group that's from the US. All the others are European, so fixed prices are here to stay. And finally, in recent years, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, the number of books printed, the average number of books printed have gone down. That's very serious because I've noticed that in the last 2 or 3 years. And that's because it's no longer prestigious to read. In fact, youngsters now boast about the fact that they don't read. I have my doubts about that. They boast that they don't read, but actually figures show us, and we were with some youngsters this morning, and we saw that there are youngsters that read, that are addicted to read it. And according to the Cultural Ministry, the age group that most reads are those between the 18 and 26. And if you go to the Madrid book fair or the Durango book fair, you'll see queues of youngsters. As Remedios Zafra said, there's a huge connection between anti-feminism and anti-intellectualism. There is an attempt at anti-intellectualism, but it's very, very closely linked to a certain way of thinking and of living and of a society that we want to build. When we want to build a different kind of society, then there is people that claim reading. Miren Milela Beitia, who's been a literature teacher for many, many years, she says that actually people read better than when she was young, and that youngsters read more than when she was younger, because there's more out there to read. In my experience, there still is respect for reading, but actually reading in its own right isn't out there. That's what I see anyway. I'm talking about youngsters. They'd say, oh, they're not interested in e-books, even that they live in an electronic world. They believe that books should be things that you read in paper format. Yes, there's a certain worshipping of reading, but they don't read very much. As Irati Jimenez said this morning, I'm at an age now when I feel I'm too old to start criticizing youngsters, because otherwise I'll start hearing people say the things that I used to hear when I was younger. And I think there are youngsters that defend literature, but it's a different kind of literature. Different people. Yes. People say it's better to be young in the past and old now. This is something that happens everywhere. Last night, I was watching a video by Ed Sanyak, and I don't know how many people were there. And I've got thousands of additional examples, but in the case of originals, we've got increasingly more writers. And in the world of publications in Basque, we're seeing that there are many, many writers that were born after the year 2000 that write, that read, they're well known. And the Communist Manifesto or Marxist books, if you talk about figures, more books have been published of that in the 21st century than before. They've had much more print runs, but more essays are written with the passage of time. If you go to essays in any bookshop, you'll see that those sections are increasingly big. And essays aren't just read by people that are highly educated. The public in general read them as well. We need to criticize, of course, but we also need to be empirical. And figures show that youngsters now read a lot. I don't know where those figures come from, whether they come from surveys, but they are figures. And in the Durango Book Fair, I've spent 30 years going there, and every year there's an increase in the number of readers. And for example, Student Day, Special Student Day, is a day when many books are sold, and it's not teachers that are buying them, it's students that are buying them. The same goes in the music world when they talk about Generation Z. We've also seen an increase in vinyl records. There are some groups that actually live out of selling vinyl records. You've seen that. New shops are being set up. And the same thing goes for books. Books are things that people worship. They adore them. Sometimes they want them as a decoration on their bookshelves. But sometimes they take them home and read them. But for them, the format of what they're reading is really important. Maybe with these beautiful words about our love of reading, we can close because our time is up. I've been told by the people up there in control saying it's time to finish. Yeah, we got the message. Thank you so much.
Claro, Estrella de Diego y Iván.